Today we're talking about reading slumps. I don't know about you, but that's been me for the last few months or so, and there's been a few things that have been able to help me kind of come out of it and at least just keep me on track for my reading goals, because once I fall behind on something, it's hard for me to get back into it. So today I just wanted to talk about some of my tips for getting out of a reading slump, whether that means that you're just not loving anything you're reading, or maybe you just literally haven't picked up a book in 3 months. Either way, I'm hoping that these tips and book recommendations might help you out. I have divided these up into various categories with examples and book recommendations within each one for different ways that might work for you of how to spark that love of reading again, make you want to sit down and pick up a good book. So the first category is one that I feel like is commonly recommended to people when you're kind of talking about books to get you out of a slump, and that is thrillers. Now, thrillers aren't my personal favorite genre of books to read. However, every time I pick one up, I do tend to enjoy it, at least for the most part. I can think of a few that I really didn't enjoy. Verity, but overall I think it makes sense that a thriller can really get you out of a reading slump, because the way that they are written inherently makes you want to keep going. You're kind of trying to solve a mystery, or you just want to know what's going on. You're on the edge of your seat, and they're called a page turner for a reason. My bread and butter for thrillers is definitely psychological thrillers. My holy grail favorite of all time is definitely Gone Girl. So we're thinking Sharp Objects, Girl on the Train, The Housemaid. I recently read my first Alice Feeney, Rock, Paper, Scissors. I found that to be really fun. That's more of a domestic thriller. Dark Matter is one of my favorite books in recent years that I have read. That's more of a sci-fi thriller. That one's a little more difficult to follow. You kind of have to be paying a little bit more attention to that one specifically. But I do think the way that thrillers are written, they're just naturally very fast-paced and straightforward. You're not having to learn a bunch of lore and learn a new magic system and follow the world building. They're generally very just this is what's happening, this is a character, this is another character, this is the conflict, this is the mystery. And so they're just easily palatable in that way. And for me, when I don't know what to read, I can often just pick up a thriller, read it in 2 days, and feel that sense of accomplishment, and it keeps me wanting to read more. I've also enjoyed a lot of the Lucy Foley books that I have read, so The Guest List, The Paris Apartment. I wouldn't necessarily recommend something like a Stephen King, on this list, because I just feel like those are so dense. I would never recommend a 500-page plus book for someone who's trying to get back into reading or get out of a slump. I just think that's a common mistake that people make, is they might pick up something that's, yes, very popular and very highly rated, but if it's a big book, I would really wait and save that until you're in more of a space where you're really hyper-focused on actually sitting down and reading for long periods of time. The next category of types of books to get you out of a slump are audiobooks. I have been talking quite a lot about audiobooks recently. I've only gotten into audiobooks in the last year or two, I would say, not because I had anything against them, but I'm generally not a listener in that way. I really like to have a lot of things going, and I don't really enjoy podcasts when it's in more of a narration, story structure. I actually do really enjoy it. So audiobooks have been completely saving my life lately when it comes to reading. Most of my books recently have been listened to on audiobook. A lot of people say that they have trouble focusing on an audiobook, and I totally get that. I think it just depends on how your brain works and the type of consumer that you are. But some of my favorite ways to listen to audiobooks are, one, when I'm driving. So if you have long commutes or road trips or anything like that, that's how I started my Jade City audiobook read, was on a trip to my parents, where I just had 3 straight hours and I was locked in. I was listening because there's nothing else to really do, right? You're just focusing on your safety, getting there safely. But other than that, you have all the brain mental capacity to just listen. I also listen to audiobooks a lot when I'm just doing chores around my house. I'm doing some kind of task around my house every single day. I am kind of a busybody in that way. And so I can just pop in my AirPods. Shout out to my AirPods. They survived a trip through the washing machine recently. I really prefer the AirPods for an audiobook when I'm doing stuff, moving around, as opposed to the over ears. I like these more for gaming, but when I'm listening to an audiobook, I just like the lightweight simplicity of the AirPods. And I just can listen, and I really enjoy doing that. Another way I like audiobooks is when I am gaming. This has been my current hyperfixation, is gaming, and I'm just kind of forcing myself to listen to audiobooks sometimes when I'm doing that, to feel a little bit more productive because it's just the way my brain works as a Gemini. I have a lot of hobbies and I really tend to like hyperfixate on one or two at a time. Right now that's Stardew Valley and Disney Dreamlight Valley. And those kind of games where there's like a life sim aspect or like a farming aspect, a lot of it is just kind of mindless tasks like foraging and picking up flowers and planting crops and mining for resources where you're just kind of button mashing and like accumulating stuff. Those types of scenarios I can really listen to an audiobook because I can multitask. If I'm doing something that's like really combat or like quest intensive, I can't really do the audiobook. But a lot of audiobooks also have like full cast or dramatized versions, which I think can really help to immerse you in the story. I listen to a lot of different genres on audiobooks, so I don't have specific audiobook recommendations. However, like I said, I found the Jade City and Jade War audiobooks to be done really well. I'm also a sucker for any British accent narration. I'm a simple woman that way. I really enjoyed the Britney Spears memoir narrated by Michelle Williams. I think that a lot of times like popular actors that you might recognize or like their voice, if you can find an audiobook that's narrated by them, that might be a nice way to keep your brain happy. I've heard the Project Hail Mary kind of sci-fi thriller is a really good audiobook. I know Stephen Fry does a lot of really good audiobook narrations. My favorite way to listen to free audiobooks is through my library on my Libby app. I find that audiobooks tend to have either no weight or a lot less of a weight than an ebook version because they're so much quicker for people to get through. You can really listen to an audiobook, you know, in a day or two, depending on what else you're doing. I find that like the 8 to 15 hours is a sweet spot for me. I just go through my Libby app and I have an entire tagged list of just audiobooks that are available right now so that anytime I need something to fill the time, I don't want to take a lot of time to do a bunch of research and go through my TBR. I can literally just go on my Libby audiobook available now list and pick something. I also utilize my Spotify Premium account. If you didn't know, you get 15 hours of free audiobook listening with a Spotify Premium account. So I always just pick something that's under the 15 hours so that I can listen to a complete book every month. The next category is retellings. Now for me personally, this really means Greek mythology retellings because those are like my personal favorite. But I think any kind of like classic fairy tale retelling that you really like maybe Cinderella was your favorite Disney movie as a kid. There's a lot of Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, you know, kind of retellings out there. There's a lot of modern Greek mythology retellings out there. I think that's a big reason why I loved Clytemnestra so much was because as a teenager, I was obsessed with the movie Troy. I wonder why. But like Song of Achilles, you know, Clytemnestra, all those books were really engaging, fast-paced reads for me because I already had that background and affinity for that topic. They were things that I knew I was gonna like, and I did. So if you have like a kind of favorite story, or also if you have like a favorite movie, you have maybe a series that's like a comfort watch for you, something like the Lord of the Rings, the Twilight movies, the Harry Potter movies. Something that's on my list of a movie I really love that I've never read the book that it's based on is The Princess Bride. So things like that, I feel like if you already kind of know the story, there's a lot less barrier to entry for you to pick it up because you already have the background. You're not having to learn the characters and the various relationships or where it's set at. You can kind of picture it in your mind if you've seen the movie, and it helps your brain just kind of kickstart that, you know, processing time. I think this is another reason I really love the Emily McIntyre's Never After series because I'm always interested in just seeing how an author can kind of tweak a very familiar story to me. I like those kind of dark, more twisted type of retellings, but there are tons of them out there. It's a very popular method like in media. Honestly, so many series in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years are adapted on books. I would say most things are either retellings or based on books as opposed to like original screenplays, to be honest. So if you really liked a series recently on like Netflix or Hulu or something, I'm gonna bet that it's either based on a true story, based on a book, or it's a remake of something that already exists because that's just the way that media and TV and movies is really going now. So it might be worth seeing if there is a similar retelling of a book, or maybe if your favorite movie was based on a book. This next category kind of goes in line with that, and that is reading some of your childhood or maybe just nostalgic favorites. Some of those books that just meant a lot to you when you were younger. I feel like really tapping into that like inner child can really remind you of why you loved reading. I'm a big proponent of adults reading children's literature and like middle grade and teen books. There's so much value in understanding why stories resonate with children so much and why specific stories like turn people into readers. Like stories that make kids into lifelong readers, there's something very special about that. And especially if you're really wanting to just like expand your knowledge of books and literature and language, especially if you want to be a writer or a book reviewer, I feel like you really should be also reading things that aren't necessarily meant for your age or reading level. I know a lot of people I disagree with that. Some people have mixed feelings about that, but I think that reading something that you really, really loved as a teenager, or reading something that made you a reader in your younger years, can really remind you why you love reading, reignites that spark, makes you want to read it again because you're getting that kind of same feeling that you did when you were a kid. That could just be like the Gemini childlike nature that I have, but I really enjoy revisiting a lot of my childhood favorites. For me, that's like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, the Hunger Games series, the Divergent series, and obviously those books that are meant for a younger reading level are also going to be easier language to understand, right? They're going to be quicker, easier books because they're meant for a younger audience who doesn't quite have as much experience with reading. Just as like a side note, some of the books that I haven't revisited in my adulthood, but I really would love to and just have a copy of them for like nostalgic purposes. I'm a very nostalgic person. I like Charlotte's Web and Stargirl, the Phantom Toll Booth. I have a copy of an old Shel Silverstein poetry book on my shelf. Just things like that. I feel like not every book has to be like some trophy on your Goodreads reading list. Sometimes you can just read something just to be reading it. I'm currently reading the Twilight series because I've been in a reading slump, and even though I didn't read Twilight as a teen myself, I was more of a Harry Potter kid, the sentiment is still there, right? Like it reminds me of being a teenager. It reminds me of a simpler time. They're unserious, but at the same time, it's still a book and I'm still enjoying it. They're just a fun time. Not everything has to be so serious all the time, you know? And the last category on this list is a little bit self-explanatory, but still worth mentioning, and that's obviously read something short. Read something short and sweet. This doesn't have to be even a full-length novel, something like a novella, a short story collection, poetry, like I mentioned, kind of a kid's book, a fairy tale folklore collection, a Grimm's fairy tale, maybe one story of a Sherlock Holmes collection. Just something short in length can really help give that motivation. It's less daunting, and once you finish it, you kind of get that sense of accomplishment that like motivates you to go forward. I personally need to try out more short stories. I really don't think I've ever read a short story collection other than like a kind of Grimm's fairy tale, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, that kind of is broken up into little stories. I don't think I've actually read like a more contemporary or adult fiction short story collection. Definitely something I would like to do. For short books as well, this is kind of a niche recommendation, but I'm a big Chuck Palahniuk fan. I would take that with a grain of salt. His books are very controversial, graphic, very dark and satirical, but if you are interested in that, you know, something like a Fight Club. There's also a lot of great classics out there that are quite short. The Great Gatsby, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Yellow Wallpaper, Peter Pan, The Little Prince. Like, they're classics for a reason. They have a lot of heart and story like packed into a little package, widely acclaimed as, you know, a really important piece of literature. So those are some of my tips and book recommendations for getting out of a reading slump. I hope it helped. I hope you're enjoying whatever you are reading right now. And if you are in a little bit of a slump like I am, then I'm sending you all my good reading vibes. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. If you want more book recommendations, bookish, iPad, and Kindle content, we do a lot of that here on the channel as well. I would love to have you here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.